and also my as an international transnational scholar moving across different places in China and also my lived experience here in Newcastle, in London. I feel very much as a Su Laoshi pointed out, I'm Newcastle alumni. I did my PhD degree in the department of speech. Now it's become part of the school of education, the same school as a professor for Seat House. Yeah. Okay. So my starting point is actually when I at the start of this year, perhaps for many of you, if you are fan of Fanhua, Shanghai Buddhism, you probably have noticed the big media attention on the Shanghainese. That actually was the interest in Shanghainese reignited by this hit television series. The whole cast, they have two versions. One version is in Shanghainese, and all original production is Shanghainese, and the other series is actually available in Fanhua. So what I was interested in, I love Huge, kind of Huge. I also did the debate on the internet and social media, also making me think about folk series. What do we think about these the various dialects? So in a way, it's connect with Derek's the lecture yesterday, talking about accent and various complex relationship between dialects, accent, and standardization. So I was intrigued by all the comments. Apart from the acting, but also about the Shanghainese. So this is actually from the original author. He talked about 方言是一种味道. It's a metaphor. It's about the food. Food is essential. It's also representing the regional taste. It is a flavor, it's a taste. But there's also other actors that actually appeared, had a very high visibility on the media. For example, this one, I was very much intrigued by the topic. So the topic here is not about how wonderful this Shanghainese, to hear Shanghainese, but the question is whether they are speaking standard, whether they are speaking Shanghainese correctly in a standard way. So what is standard way? What is Shanghainese? Why there is a question? And you also have authority. I hope I haven't really offended anybody here who actually made some comments about, in terms of expertise, who's speaking Shanghainese in a standard way or not. And on the bottom, there's also Wang Min, internet user. This is actually quite, as you see, this is quite complex opinion. It's okay to speak Shanghainese in a different ways because it is actually resemble how we use Shanghainese in real life. So as you see, I'm interested in the interconnection between language, culture, and folk series. The folk series is our ideas, including all of us here, our beliefs, attitudes, views about how we use and how particular dialects, languages, including mother tongue, also including second, third languages or dialect you pick up. So why particularly this folk series? The folk series is referring to obscure, unwritten yet ever-present forms in creating hierarchies and maintaining the status quo, particular our views about whether something is standard or not. It is informal because it's regarded as folk, it's not expert view. So we have come across these things before. For example, you probably have come across language acts, something much more beautiful than another language, or language acts is more useful than language. We probably have come across it before. And it also appears in our research data. It's not just about what we say, what we hear other people say, but when we collect data in the interviews, perhaps this is actually coming from a project I did a couple of years ago. This is from a Chinese participant in interviews that Chinese basketball players just reward the coach tell them to do, while European players will think why they are doing it. Clearly, this is a problematic. Well, not problematic is actually in my interesting, and we knew we have been reflective on this. But how do we deal with these views coming from participants as our data? So this talk is very much based on my chapter contributing to article forum on linguistic diversity and discrimination published by a team's research at OEC, University of Australia. And my chapter is entitled Folk Series Hierarchies and Space in Between. So there are two parts. One is actually, what does hierarchy look like and why we're talking about. And second part, space 63, what can we do about these folk series? So that's the plot here is I will start explaining what are the values that the notion of the folk bring to understanding the meta commentaries, our beliefs, and there was a paper yesterday talking about teachers' beliefs, and this is very I'll define the folk. The social life of the notion of folk theories is sort of kind of linguistic and beyond, and why is it important? Why we actually need to look at this, and what impact the folk series hierarchy have, joined by lived experience, and how you 3 chapters of my life, what can we do about them? First part, so what are exactly folk series language and culture? They are generally referred to as ordinary, non-specialist understanding here, in contrast with expert knowledge. But who are the folk? They are, Laura Miller is very keen to point out the folk here in Chinese, 民间, but they are not in any way a pejorative sense of the everyday language user. They are used in contrast with expert, but they are not in any ways representing rural, marginalized, less educated, or romanticized groups. So there might be some connotations of slightly referring to rural, but here the folk is nothing close to these categories pointed out by Dennis Preston, who is a social linguist. Language, the folk theory has been studied and referred to as language myths. Myths 是这些 we see it commonly explained. For example, we might have come across before some languages just not good enough. The media are ruling English, and here is a funny one. English spelling is catastrophic. Catastrophic is spelled with K here. Right? So this has been studied as a language myth since we hear, and some of us even perhaps have some sort of belief investment in some of the claims here, but they are myths. Things are not necessarily true. In the back in 1990s, folk theory has been approached by dialectologist Dennis Preston. He is perhaps one of the very few scholars that look at folk theories consistently. He argued, despite folk theory sounds haphazardly, it's sort of existing there, but there is consistency and elaborateness in folk theories. He actually used an experiment for nowadays looking back, it is controversial. He called cross-ethnic imitation task. So what does mean cross? So he asked his students, European American students, imitate African American students. So white students sound black, and then black students sound white. I mean, this is obviously controversial. But what is interesting is that he found when the European American students, when they imitated black, they came up with a very limited set of phonological, morphological, and syntactic devices in terms of patronage, rhythm, and also the tone. What is also interesting is that they come up with a wide range of roles that when they actually think about black, so that's what you see on the long list. Angry black, badass in bad languages, the basketball player. So these certainly are kind of stereotypes people hold about the Black, and not just some Black, but the roles, particular typecast roles, society roles for Black. In contrast, when they ask Black African American student imitating white, what they discovered is actually they have very few repertoires to draw on. And not only that, as you see, there are only 3 roles they can think of, very limited roles. The richness of roles and also the limited, quite clear cut of sounding Black in terms of linguistic features made Dennis Preston think African American vernacular English is a folk object of white Europeans. So clearly, this is a consistency and elaborateness among the folk series once you use experimental design. And he went on to look at dialectal perception variations among the participant. For example, if I ask you to draw the map where Geordie accent is spoken, and when we pull these views together, it will be interesting to see how our views will come up with, and that's actually perception, dialectal variation, people believe. So before we go on, perhaps it's useful to look at some caveats. What is folk and expert? So previously I said folk views is actually non-specialist views in contrast with expert. But when we look at it closely, the dichotomy is not that clear cut. So it's quite interesting to hear Derek's view about fluidity and permeability of these different dichotomies. So Piper asks, do non-linguists practice linguistics? So we all know neighbors of our friends and family members who are really keen linguists, even if they don't really do linguistics as we do. So in between experts and ordinary speakers, you have academic editors, proofreader, writer, comedian, activist, and all the social media user, as I show on the second slide when people talking about Shanghainese, why standard Shanghainese or not. Okay. So between these wide range of roles, the roles are not clear cut and they are permeable. What it means, if these roles are permeable, interchangeable, the knowledge production in between, all the knowledge is also not as clear cut. So we really see this expert and folk series, the knowledge production, the ownership is permeable. The second, in terms of nature of folk theory, so when we call something theory is a really big word. It sounds really complicated. It has to be have a certain rules and set. So perhaps in many ways, the folk series is better referred to as views. We're talking about attitudes, belief, subjective theories, everyday concept. Now, if we accept this is perhaps we are talking about folk view rather than folk series, there is another question. For people who are familiar with social linguistic key, some concept, family language policy, or language practices, you probably have come across the term language ideologies before. So what's the difference between folk views and language ideology? For Laura Miller, she believes that language ideology is, folk theories could be regarded as a subcategory of language ideologies. Both are concerned about views, beliefs. However, this is the however bit. A folk theory gave people, perhaps some of the researchers, a comfortable focus, including myself, looking back, making sense of my own lived experience. It gave me a focus on everyday understanding that does not need to reach to macro level political, social, economic, and nationalist part, but also relates to the everydayness. They are there, present, and we don't even know how it comes in the first place, but they are there. We all have this. And think about your belief, thinking about your beliefs towards about a particular language or particular language dialect. So these are why I think it's still relevant for us, and it's actually important for us to look at this idea of the beliefs we have toward languages. So what is social life of folk theory? Why people don't really talk about it anymore? So just very quickly, it started in 1960s. Harry Holness' work in the Social Linguistics Symposium talk about we need to look at folk ideas, folk beliefs, folk views toward pragmatic views of speech act. This is very much actually related to that historical stage when there was lots of structuralist views represented by Leonard Bloomfield on structuralists, which very much regarding everyday beliefs as secondary or tertiary in dealing with they're outside the classroom, they're outside our serious scholarly book. We don't talk about that. In the second stage, in 80s, 90s, I mentioned his work, Dennis Preston, who is the really key person in bringing the folk dialectology into academic view. He looked at what folk know and feel about dialects and look at how solidarities, marginalization through the perception dialectologies. And then this is also very important in parallel. We also have folk psychology used by philosophers and psychologists referring to theory of mind, how people think about particular things in the cognitive science. Now, in 2010, the folk is expanded into other, not just social linguistic, but also brought into applied linguistic by an initiative as, for example, ILA. ILA is International Association for Applied Linguistics, where BAO, British Association for Applied Linguistics, of which I'm chair, is affiliate to. They have an initiative called Research Network in Folk Linguistics, and they are very active. They produce a special issue with the title, Bringing the Folk into Applied Linguistics, just like I'm doing now, bringing the folk into Chinese language teaching and learning. They actually had in that special issue, it covered a variety of topics: communication, first language acquisition, language contact, and language policy. It's actually a very interesting collection looking at how folk ideas can be influential in these aspects of subdisciplines. Now, in 2020, in Laura Miller's reflection, it appeared in the encyclopedia, she talked about maybe folk theory is out of favor because people rarely talk about it anymore. However, interesting, when I actually preparing for this talk, I realized actually this term has been picked up by social media communication scholars. People talking about how our understandings of algorithm, AI, also came across several papers here, talking about teachers' beliefs, student beliefs about and their understanding of how AI use can impact how these people, including us, engage with social media, engage with AI. And I think that's actually really important, and how our fear or desire to engage, to use AI with technology, impact the way we engage with technology. Microphone doesn't work today, by the way. This is one of the reality when we can talk about AI, but in reality, physical challenges. So why now? Despite all this, I do think there are challenges and limitations. To be completely honest, this term is regarded as less robust, particularly in the research tradition, which believe positivism has to be objectivity, has to be inequalities, have to be representative. I was on the education panel for REP 2020, where we had huge debate on what is rigor. In UK academic, rigor is big word. You can actually kill somebody's paper, but I think it's less rigorous than others. But what exactly rigor? So this is actually folk theories regarded as less robust, empirically unfounded common theories, impoverished and seen. I was trying to see, what are the arguments on both sides. And it may have, a negative connotation of the folk, 民俗、民间、老百姓等等. It's always have that less authoritative, less expertise, it's grassroots. And also I recognize different priorities and different agendas of the time. And there are new terms, and there's also some old term or reclaim to meet challenges and priorities this current time. For example, the traditional community in language policy, indigenous. And I was actually in Australia last week in Perth. There was a big huge interest in decolonizing traditional, the indigenous community. So all these, and also citizenship, the social linguistics is also a very big topic, talking about grassroots participation in languages. These are different priorities. For now, but I still think the notion of folk series offer indispensable heuristic tool for understanding the critical impact of everyday knowledge. The emphasis is on everyday knowledge that sustains linguistic inequality and power structure. So, and I do, and by heuristic, what I mean is 启发性的. It is about criteria, but the 启发性 is not, I think it's not precise translation. It is about criteria, method, or principles for deciding which are among several alternative courses of action. It enables to ask the question, but not to give the answer. So our job here is not necessarily to find the answer, but to ask the question, help us to understand, to provoke, to see the issues, the problems. And in another reason why we need to look into folk theory is in the current debate about knowledge production and inter-epistemic debate, folk theory, if we believe there is a pluriversal perspective when it comes to knowledge production, as discussed yesterday by Derek, folk theory is also part of the socially distributed knowledge that embody diverse positions and practices. And therefore, it has its own practical and representational validity. The concern here is not about whether folk theory, your belief, my belief, or his belief is correct. What matters is they are there, they exist. They influence how we approach our languages, dialects, second languages, or third languages, and it's also influence how we work with our students, right? Our view is very much important in shaping our pedagogies and our interactions with people around us. And I try to find a better picture, but this is a closer I can get. I feel this is a window into the local, shared, operable, socially and culturally situated logics. It helps us as researchers, as teachers to understand, gave a heuristic tool to understand the logic out there. So what can folk theories be useful? I'll give you two examples very quickly before I go into second part. So in terms of the critical folk social linguistic knowledge, it can help us to identify knowledge specifically about languages and social linguistic words that create and sustain linguistic inequality in power structures, both at the grassroots and in academia. So this is a Nathan Alvarez study. He is interested in the use of the Chinese Mandarin, particularly in Malaysia context. He was curious in the Malaysian context, there are a lot of other languages, not necessarily Mandarin, but Hakka and Hokkien spoken brought into Malaysia by Chinese immigrants. But then in terms of the language media for instruction in Chinese school, Mandarin is the only medium, language medium instruction there. So he was curious why Mandarin, not the other dialect that's available, afforded among the community. So in his interview, this is just one example from his interview. He found the folk views that came across in these interviews are very helpful to understand the local aspect. And yesterday, Zhu Laoshi talking about Xinjiang, mother tongue. Here, exactly, coming back to that notion, I found that very endearing way to talk about mother tongue. So this is for Nathan album. He believed because in the last sentence particular, because we're Chinese, so we must learn our mother tongue. And this is a clear statement of folk beliefs of our relationship between us and mother tongue. So Nathan, looking at these data, he argues that these exchanges reveal the belief that the mother tongue is always a language of ethnic group. It's not necessarily related to the language we are brought up in. Yeah? So it could be in the so-called Western English-speaking scholarly work, mother tongue is usually regarded as the first language, the language of your mother, father, the parents, your carers speak. But here, Aubrey said, according to this and other related other interviews, he said this is actually quite interesting, revealing the non-Western interpretation about mother tongue. The mother tongue for the Chinese is the mother of all tongues, is the ethnic group. But there is also a question how many ethnic groups can be represented here, Mandarin. The Mandarin is technically is a language of half ethnic group. The second study is actually based on my work, a joint work with Xiao Lan, Kurt Richardson, and Li Wei. We look at the family language policy because parents' folk knowledge is likely to influence their decision in parity language. That's where we started all. So this is a research project. We collected 3 sources of data. The first one is we use survey data asking participants' views towards multilingualism, we divide it into pride, prejudice, and pragmatism. Is a table on the left, and also parents self-reported practices after their first children were born. We also collected interviews about their language choice and practices. So from the survey, the table on the left, what you see, there is a strong multilingualism views. Parents in our survey strongly believe that speaking home languages positively impact on their children's cognitive academic development. So this is all wonderful news, and parents do believe this. But when we actually look at self-report data, things begin to change after their children start to school. There are clear shifts. More parents begin to use English more than their non-English home language once the children were born, once they started school. So this is confirmed by interview data from one of the participants. Mrs. A talk about begin to worry about their daughter's communication skills when the teacher said she hadn't spoken. And Mrs. A's decision on speaking English more is underpinned a folk view toward language acquisition. That is, speaking the home languages might impede the development of the dominant language of society. So this is actually opposite what we have in the first survey. So what is it? What it means, the shift towards using English, more English after children were born or when they started school, is driven by the concerns about their children's English language development and the desire to support their children's performance at school through English, through the language of the dominant context. And clearly, it shows there is still work need to be done in terms of recognizing these so-called home community languages at school, legitimizing their views, and also thinking about how we support academic development through other languages than English. And also from this study, it also shows it's really important to triangulate different sources of data, for the survey data and also self-reported data, and in many ways it's kind of a retrospective longitudinal data and plus interview data to help us to understand factors in language choices and practices. So far, we have talked about definitions, key concerns, and social life, and this notion of folk series. time that was in favor and out of favor, but back on in other disciplines. The examples we have used demonstrate how the folk theory lens can help us to identify knowledge and create and sustain linguistic inequality and power structure. So in the second part, I'm going to reflect on my lived experience with linguistic hierarchy and folk theories, and particularly reflect on Joseph Swansburg's quote, all dialects are equal, but some dialects are more equal than others. Right? Methodology, this is a folk theory has used a variety of methods before, experimental method, survey method, interview, which I have talked about very briefly. The method here in the second part is about storytelling through autoethnography. So auto has two parts. It's about me, and the other ethno is about culture. This is the bit where researcher becomes research, and research becomes researcher, research becomes participant of their own research. In the case of the autoethnography, so the researcher is primary participants and observer at the same time. Previously, I have used the autoethnography in understanding scholars, transnational scholars' experience in globalizing university. And I believe using that method have helped me to generate fresh, complex, and nuanced understanding of transnational scholars. And many of you here have also transnational scholars, have worked and lived in many parts of the world. Now, a bit more on this methodology. In this book, where I contribute a chapter, there is a methodological factor. I feel really very much touched by the main statement on that. It's by Marilyn Matter. She eloquently talking about autoethnography as a living practice. It's not just lived, but living practice, resistance and truth-telling in her methodological chapter. She highlights the focus here, the autoethnography focuses on I and how we want to tell stories about ourselves, others, and our experience. So it's it's through this autoethnography, it is, although it's subjective, interpretive, interrelational, based on the premises that personal is political, personal is scholar, and personal is pedagogical. And I do relate very much when Derek yesterday started with positionality. And I do really feel this is a very important connecting point. Telling personal is political, scholar, and also pedagogically. In terms of decolonizing research, Phoenix and Luba has argued it is totally different methodology that seeks to inaugurate another logic, another language, and another way of doing research that has potential to liberate social science research from the clutches of hegemonic conventionalism. If we talk about decolonizing, we do need to talk about decolonizing methodology. It's no longer helpful to use the old positivist methodology to talk about decolonizing research. And this is very much relevant to connect with decolonizing debate. Now, in the next I think few slides, I'm going to share 3 chapters of my life. It's pretty tough to talk about your own personal stuff, your personal trajectories in front of an audience. So this is I didn't really plan in any way, but somehow ended up I moved to a new place every 9 years. So I will start with my life in Northeast in 1980 at Dongbei. That's where I was born and grown up with. And this is based on my chapter, so I'm going to refer to the notes. So my first memory of encounter of my folk theory linguistic hierarchy was during my childhood in Northeast China. Shown on the map before, I'm not familiar, this is actually a very cold part of China. But summer definitely hotter than what we have experienced these couple days. So the local dialect there is called Dongbei-Hua. It's regarded as very much unsophisticated. People nodding, okay, connecting, and it Omuru. This perception places at perhaps a lower sort of run of the. If you look at social, cultural, linguistic capital ladder, this is very much at the bottom of that ladder. So I'm going to play a recording of one is in 普通话 so 大家都是好朋友 we are good friends, no need to be so polite. And second recording is in 东北话 now have a pause. How do you actually render the same wording to 东北话
然后都是好朋友，我不要这么客气。哎哎哎，哎呀，
So, with all my training in phonology, pragmatics, and linguistics, I struggle to describe what is it they are trying to play. So essentially, this is playing on this saying, if we are so good, there's no word. We don't even need to say it. If you hear this vocalization is essentially about we're so good, there's no need to be polite. Okay. So when I was nearly 10, my parents moved from State Farm to a research institute in Jiangxi, a medium-sized city in the far northeast of China. I joined a new school set up for families of my parents' workplace. Many of the school teachers and parents' colleagues had migrated from other parts of the country to this lesser developed region, nicknamed Beidahuang, or Great Northern Wilderness, during the 1970s. This meant that school and residential quarters where we lived had a wide variety of language, accent, and dialects. However, not all accents were considered equal. I quickly realized the accent I had from the State Farm was seen as different or inferior to those of my peers. So this sense of inferiority was linked to the folk series of social hierarchy. As a newcomer from a lower rung of social ladder, moving from the countryside to a city only a few hundred miles away had diminished whatever social, cultural, and linguistic capital I had. Although my academic performance was on the par with my peers, my way of speaking became a target for teachers who wanted me, sorry, apologize for my teacher, who became a target for teachers who wanted me to assimilate it into their version of standard Mandarin Chinese. My Chinese teacher, who actually spoke a mix of standard Pudonghua and Northeast accent, took it upon herself to upgrade my accent. In lesson, she made me read word pairs that contrasted retroflex consonant, 这个是卷舌音 which are tricky for Northeast speakers. In Pudonghua, the retroflex feature, 这个卷舌音呢是有3套的啊，滋滋滋、支吃诗。But this distinction, meaning of pair, don't really exist in dialects like Northeast Chinese, 东北话. I had to relearn every character with these sounds, memorizing these by heart. So when I got better noticing differences, what I also became self-conscious of my pronunciation and my problems, I started self-monitoring. So that's actually very early encounter with folk linguistic theories. And years later, I moved to Beijing, went to study in university in Beijing. I encountered another layer of linguistic hierarchy, this time between the elite Beijing accent and other varieties. A distinct feature of Beijing accent is erhua in phonological processes that retract entire syllable or words. The feature is a hallmark of Beijing smooth operator. I'm going to play a video clip that gives you taste of this erhua yin, how this erhua yin could be translanguaged onto English pronunciation. people are they're uploading their version of pronunciation, and this Chinese accent, Chinese language in English got the most vote, right? So I did live in Beijing for 9 years. I started while I was staying in Beijing. I started picking up these features, including these Yin, and also in the Beijing dialect He. But I also aware about these different variations, and I was very careful. I do find myself use te. I begin to use te, but rarely I use te because it sounded too Beijing to me at that time. And interestingly, while I incorporate Beijing features into my Putonghua, my Northeast accent remained there. Really interesting, and could be activated when needed. So when I talk to my parents on the phone, I could hear my Northeast accent coming on board, and that it wasn't exactly I was switching from one dialect to another. As in some people said, this is called switching. It's not quite that, but it is about selecting some feature and using other features of other dialects, and sometimes even merge. I can't even tell which bit is which bit. So reflecting on these practices, I realized this is actually aligned with translanguaging practices, which refer to multilingual speakers' ability to move beyond traditional language boundaries and modes of communication. And these practices help me navigate the linguistic hierarchy in Beijing and embrace a cosmopolitan identity as I transition to adulthood. So very quickly, I'm going to move again. So this time I'm moving to Newcastle here a few years later. When I started PhD. And when I got to Newcastle, things everything seemed to begin to fall apart. Because when I got there, I realized the hierarchy order of Putonghua over language variety was recalibrated here. The relationship in many ways between different variety of Chinese language is recalibrated, and it became stratified, complex. I wanted to pay tribute using this opportunity to pay tribute to Yan Bluma, who have published so much, and some of the people here did study with Yan. He was talking about stratified complexes, where when we actually move to have multiple norms rather than one single norms, when these multiple norms attach to a multitude of centers of authority, local as well as translocal, momentary as well as lasting, the family. So all these factors come into play into these stratified complexes that influence our views toward particular languages. Now, here, many locals volunteer. Thank you very much for your help. But you may be aware the Chinese diaspora community in UK, which often described as one homogeneous group in the literature, is both very multilingual and very multicultural. So, for example, I didn't speak any Cantonese, but when I arrived here in the 1990s, Cantonese was, and maybe still today, the preferred language everyday communication in Chinese supermarkets, restaurants, and community centers. This is due to high volumes of migration from Hong Kong, and Cantonese was following popularity by Hakka and Hokkien. So I remembered coming from the north of China, I remember those awkward, embarrassing feeling of not being able to communicate in these community places, despite being an ethnic Chinese myself. There's also the question of which cultures. The Chinese New Year Festival, I don't know whether you have been to the Chinese New Year Festival here in Newcastle and in London. It was actually in the traditional Hong Kong style. So the phrases, we don't, in my hometown, certainly where I grew up, we greet each other on Chinese New Year Day with the phrases 你好吗 或者是新年快乐. But here, the preferred phrase of greeting is 恭喜发财, meaning wishful prosperity. And I do love the crispy duck served in the restaurant, which I was debating whether it's goose or duck yesterday. But they're not the same as a roast Beijing duck, where people in North grown up with. So what I found is actually during that time is actually not only as a migrants, as international students, I not only lost the languages to communicate, of which I was supposed to be a member, but also the validity of my culture, the culture of grown up with. The culture shock I experienced came more from the realization that my Chineseness is in question, rather than from being in English-speaking foreign country. So coming to very much actually the end, I'm going to skip something. So quickly, what can we do about folk series highlighting? I do think this is actually we have lots of professional responsibilities as a practitioners and also as a special teachers and scholars. Conceptually, we need to explore. I hope I convince you today the heuristic potential of folk series. Do not dismiss them as incidental and idiosyncratic, and do not lose sight of its ordinariness and pervasiveness. Message-wise, need to explore ways of capturing and unpacking folk series, ways of capturing folk series beyond more traditional method, as you see in the experimental interview, but looking at storytelling, such as Northwood bring subjectivity, bring interpersonal, bring into relation, these feelings into our research. So what are our professional responsibility? And I think as a teachers and the institution play a really important role in understanding folk series and also changing, influencing these folk series. Inclusive school policies, recognizing, legitimizing, ratify those less spoken languages, not just the dominant language, but other languages, dialect, but also thinking about teacher training, openness to multiple perspective, multiple norms, languages, dialects, accent. Government policies are put down there. The bottom one is that Singapore's mother tongue struggle, and top one is our struggle with with civilization. These kind of debates are exactly where we need to get involved. But of course, public service need to be made accessible to all languages and dialects. And I want to finish off by way of conclusion of a translation of our English poem published. It's actually coming from the movie Twilight. It's a lovely poem. And I noticed a couple of years ago, it began to circulate on social media, various version of translation in different variety. It certainly shows a different variety of Mandarin and also dialects and also other. It does show there is a growing awareness of dialectal relationship, and we need to create space for these dialectal variations. Okay, the first one is ChatGPT version in right, and that's the Chinese one. The second one, the bottom one, is the most interesting. And then lastly, I want to actually bring in, this is the exactly second anniversary of my father who passed away 2 years ago. And this is his translation. At that time, he was a key linguist. He isn't an academic, but he is a key linguist published as agricultural scientist. He also lived here with us, visited us. And this is his translation of English into Chinese. And I want to pay tribute to those loved ones, including my own, and maybe some of your loved ones who lost their life during COVID. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I want to actually say acknowledgement of helps and input I have received, and including my colleagues and the lovely PhD students sitting here from my center and also my neighboring center, Center for Linguistics. And thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my story. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your story and our stories. Thank you.
Thank you for your very informative and insightful talk. So now it's time for questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Ju, and I really enjoy and appreciate your wonderful and insightful speech. It's really relatable to me personally as well. And also, I just want to ask you some very simple or stupid questions. Since I and my studies also focus on the social linguistics and especially the heritage student. And I just want to ask you, what's the difference on the relationship between the folk views and language ideologies and social norms, and how can we adopt these different concepts into the second language teaching for the heritage students.
Thank you very much. So the heritage students is heritage language is very close to my heart because it is the language and could be language of identity and the language of mother tongue. That's actually very much an emotional connection that's actually relates to all of us here. The difference between language ideology and folk theory is I don't think they are vastly different. However, in the literature, language of the ideology that came in around 1990s, very much as a pretty, it is both are about views, attitudes, assumptions toward language and language use. But language ideologies are very much actually used in terms of relationship between socio-economic, political status languages. So for example, in language policy, practices, you will hear the term language ideologies a lot, but less on the folk theories. The reason I like folk theory a bit more in understanding, trying to make sense my own use lived experience with languages that everydayness. It does give me a comfortable focus on everyday people around us. We can't really pin down. And I think it's in the second language, we're working with heritage. It is really about teachers' belief, working with what we have inherited. These things are really not taught very much in the textbook when we train up as teachers. No one talk about these things. What's your experience learning? What's your views toward dialects? What's your view about correctness, accuracy, standardization, or authenticity? And I also heard people talk about authenticity here. What is authenticity? What do you mean by authenticity? So these are really important assumptions we have without questioning. And that's why I think folk theory is helpful as a heuristic tool. Remember that slide is a window that help us to ask some questions. We may not know the answers, but certainly asking questions is first step toward understanding what's happening on this.
Thank you so much.
Consuming, sir. One more, please.
Yeah, yes, sure. Yeah, thank you, Professor Zhu. And I feel like after your lecture, I do feel that Chinese teaching as teaching Chinese as a second language should be more inclusive. And I do have experience of students coming from Southeast Asian countries, and then they do the very unique Chinese kind of accent. And what I do normally is to correct them and to help them to improve to speak standard Mandarin, and then they will go back to Southeast Asian countries and speak their local dialect. So, however, do you think there should be worries that we will, by being more inclusive, we will lower down our Mandarin Chinese teaching quality in this country? Or what's the advantages of being inclusive and the disadvantages of inclusive?
It's a very good question, and it's a big debate here, and it really is actually bring up the issue of assessment, for example, speaking assessment. How do you read pronunciation, accent? It has to be there. It's not just about perhaps modern languages, including Chinese, but also English. It's very traditional. There is the IELTS, the TOEFL out there. It's a big machine. So there is a bigger debate to have whether we need to, how much we need to familiarize or in many ways sort of shepherd our students toward that single norm. But the question is, as I think yesterday and today, it is questionable whether there are mean, I think we, perhaps people here would agree, there are multiple norms there, multiple ways of speaking. And what we can do is create some space in the classroom to let people hear these different accents, understand each other with hope. The more people, more exposure to different accent dialects and exposure, legitimization of these dialects can help us to be closer to the aim that being inclusive.
I know it seems like I think I sometimes I feel like I should to learn a variety of different Chinese spoken around the world. For example, people in Taiwan, how they use the language, and the people in Southeast Asian countries, how they speak Chinese. And if you do not know that, it's very difficult to be inclusive. Yeah. Thank you for the lecture.
I just say something, thank you so much for such a conceptually, methodologically, and empirically rich presentation. It's not just one study, it's just a series of collection of your long-term work in the field of applied linguistics and social linguistics. And not only being a role model in terms of research, but also as a scholar, as a person, I feel, your talk has allowed myself, I'm sure colleagues here would agree that, you have demystified so many things about what we should be thinking about, should be doing, and not only in the classroom, but outside the classroom. Generally in life, as a person, a thinker, maybe a researcher, so rich. And you also demystified yourself. I feel so well connected to you as a person who knows so much about you. And I'd like to say a personal, thank you to you, but also, would you allow me to, say a collective thank you to Professor Zhu? Thank you. That was in 2013. Yeah. Authenticity. I remember.
Oh, yeah, that authenticity.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So.
Sorry, because of time consuming,
Yeah.
please feel free to ask a question during the tea break. But tea break, can we just ask my Chinese coordinator to introduce